I hereby call this the third meeting of the House Standing Committee on Families and Children to order. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones. Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Baker, Representative Kleins, Representative Decker,
Present.
Representative Dietz,
Here.
Representative Elliott, Representative Fleming, Representative Gooch, Representative Proctor,
Here.
Representative Rayburn,
Here.
Representative Raymond, Representative Rorks, Representative Wilner,
Here.
Representative Wilson, Vice Chair Riley, Chair Heverin.
Here, are there any members that maybe walked in late that would like to note their attendance?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's marked me as being here. Ken Fleming. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we get started on the agenda, I'd have asked committee staff to put on my agenda for each month so we can talk about the total number of children in out-of-home care. And last month's number showed that there were 8,047. I think that as we go through this committee, that's a number we continue to highlight and recognize. And until that number is much lower than that, we still have a lot of work to do. I'm actually going to give the chair over to Chairman Riley to do the meeting.
The first bill we will hear is House Bill 561. Representative Heverin, could you please introduce yourself for the record and proceed?
Thank you, Chairman. I am Samara Heverin. I represent the 18th District, and I will let my guest introduce himself for the record.
Charles All. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Chamber Center for Policy and Research.
Thank you. House Bill 561 is a bill that we've been working on during the interim. This bill is supported by both Kentucky League of Cities and Kentucky Association of Counties. And what this does is it recognizes whenever we did it, we've been working with several groups, and there was a survey done of what are the biggest impediments to child care in Kentucky and starting facilities, and it was local zoning. And so what this bill does is it encourages, it's not a mandate, and encourages local governments to look at their zoning ordinances to make sure there's not any regulation preventing child care centers from opening in their local counties or cities. I think this is very important to acknowledge, and while we're looking at steps to help child care in Kentucky, this is the number one thing that we need to start working on. And I will let my counterpart here share the rest of the bill.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to this committee for considering this legislation. As the sponsor noted, the child care continues to be an ongoing conversation in this state, and I know there's a lot of different ideas out there on how we increase access to child care and early childhood education services, but I think something that's been somewhat left off out of these conversations is the role of local governments and the impact that things like zoning and land use regulations can have on the availability of childcare. And one of the things we've discovered in talking with a lot of early childhood education providers and childcare service providers is that land use rules and zoning regulations can often create inadvertent barriers, oftentimes, to the availability of childcare services. So if you think about restrictions on where childcare is allowed to exist, the types of permitting processes that go into it, that can often come up as a significant issue. And on behalf of the Chamber, we care deeply about this issue because of its impact on workforce participation and economic development. One of the things that the president of the Kentucky Chamber, Ashley Watts, likes to say is that the superpower of the Chamber is convening, our ability to bring people together. And that's one of the roles that we played in the development of this piece of legislation. We worked with local governments, local government organizations like KACO, KLC, the Council of Area Development Districts, and then also talked with a lot of childcare providers and early childhood education advocates. And we were able to try to thread a needle and to bring all them together on something that made a lot of sense on how to accomplish some reforms to local land use rules and zoning regulations, while at the same time fully preserving local control, local autonomy, and the ability of local governments to determine their own rules. And one of the inspirations for this was actually a piece of legislation that came out of the House in 2021, which was House Bill 7, which created the Recovery Ready Communities program. And that's been a very successful program that has helped individual communities scale up their resources for substance use disorder treatment and recovery. This bill takes a very similar approach, where it creates a certified child care communities designation where a local government could voluntarily decide that it wants to achieve that designation. And then essentially what it would do would go through a series of steps that would include developing some proactive programming to help support the availability of childcare, and then they would also be doing these comprehensive reviews of their land use and zoning rules and identifying barriers to the availability of childcare and then implementing reforms to those. And once they've gone through that process, they can then work with their area development district to get approval, and then they submit their final application to the Cabinet for Economic Development, which is kind of a new player in these conversations. And that's a good thing because this is an economic development issue. But then once they have that designation, this is something that they can broadcast not only to families in and outside of their community, but also to businesses. And this is something we are increasingly hearing about from employers that are looking for places to expand, looking for new places to bring jobs. They want to make sure that when they come to these places that they will have workers and that those workers will have access to things like childcare. And so this all fits together very nicely. So we think this is a good proposal that would help accomplish a lot of these goals, again, preserving that balance between increasing access to childcare, maintaining safety, and then at the same time maintaining local control. So I'd be happy to go into other details with the bill, but with that, I'll turn back over to the sponsor.
Thank you. There's also language in the bill, just some cleanup from House Bill 499 from 2022. As you know, as we progress and have to make changes, we continue have to clean up legislation for unintended consequences or just some clearing up some loopholes. And so you will see at the back of the legislation that there's some cleanup legislation. And one of the biggest things is it removes the word pilot from the 499 program, and it would codify it into statute for it to stay. And when I came into the child care conversation several years ago, it's all about workforce. And I think that there have been a lot of questions of, well, should state government be telling local governments what to do? And we're not telling them what to do. To me, it's no different than us doing resolutions, encouraging the federal government to make changes on daylight savings time. All we're doing is encouraging local governments, because a big part is education. When we're looking at workforce barriers, I remember going around Litchfield after the pandemic, and people would say, we need people to get back to work. And it was people weren't going back to work in their minds because of stimulus checks or because of government handouts. And really, that's how I got into it, because I was like, people are not going to work because of other issues. It's bigger barriers, and childcare is a huge barrier for people. It's so expensive. And so in 2022, if you were here, I went to each member and shared how much childcare costs in your district. And so for us, it's just an education portion and being able to set them up for success. We're happy to answer any questions that you all have at this time.
I think at this time we need to adopt the sub. Anybody want to make a motion on the sub? We got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we can take the motion on the sub. On the bill as amended by the sub. Do we have questions? Yes, we have one question from Representative Raymond.
Hey, you all. Thanks for this bill. I signed on to it. I think it's a cool thing to try. I want to push on a couple of things that you said, though. You said when it comes to childcare, it's all about workforce. I'd say it's halfway about child development, right? Because we know that kids really thrive in play-based spaces, right? With caring practitioners that are not their parents, right? And it's what helps them reach their full potential, because there's learning happening every second, every minute, every hour, every day. And we don't require that they show up to school until they're 6 years old. And often the kids who don't show up until they're 6 are so far behind, it's hard to catch them up. So I want to not lose sight of the fact that childcare is great for kids. The Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership, House Bill 499 from last session, it was a pilot, right? We thought, let's see how it works. We got some reporting in the interim. It didn't work great. So why are we going to institutionalize a program that didn't work great rather than pivoting and trying something else that might work better?
That's a great question, Representative Raymond. I think what gets missed in that conversation is that this program started in July of 2020 3, and so that's 6 months. So in government years, that's like 3 seconds of it being institutional, of it being part of the institution. I think it's a lot of employers are nervous to participate because of the word pilot. And in 2022, that was the number one. We didn't have that in there originally. The Senate came back and added that in there. And it really caused a lot of concern because employers were scared to give that. Representative Raymond, I've seen your comments through the last year of your concern. But that was the first bill that we've actually done in the General Assembly that actually acknowledged the problem with childcare and trying to look at a different way instead of just subsidizing it. And I think that's really important as we all have different approaches for bills and policy. It was the first piece of childcare legislation that got passed in my time here. And so even though it might not be everyone's fit, it's a different way to look at it. And as a way to build upon, I think recognizing that employers have to offer different they've got to offer more in their toolkit to employees. So if that was a way to get that into starting to offer for employees, that's a win in my book. Whether $200,000 was taken or $400,000 was taken, that's a lot more than that was ever there before.
Can I make a couple?
Absolutely.
Just a couple of quick comments on that. The first one I would want to make is that I do think it's important to understand what problem House Bill 499 was seeking to solve. This was not. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the sponsor, but my understanding of that legislation, it was never intended to solve childcare and solve all of our problems. In fact, it went after a very, very specific problem, which is the fact that we have a subsidy program that exists in this state through the Child Care Assistance Partnership that reaches a lot of families that need it, particularly families that run up to about 85% of state median income. Families that exist outside of that level, middle income families, working families, they still need a lot of support when it comes to affording childcare. And I can't imagine why we would not want to support a program that seeks to deliver some assistance to those particular families and to help them, and particularly to do that in a cost-effective way that leverages private sector dollars. I think that's a very worthwhile thing to do. And I would add, ever since Kentucky did this, several states have now implemented programs very, very similar to it. North Carolina passed legislation to model a program very similarly after the Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership. Virginia is exploring that legislation. Legislation was filed in Texas seeking to do this. We've had legislators reach out from Nebraska, South Dakota, Utah, several states exploring how can we implement something very, very similar to this so that we can accomplish those similar goals in a fiscally responsible manner, which is what the Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership tries to achieve. The second point I would want to stress is this is a remarkably new and innovative program, and employers tend to be very cautious when it comes to changing benefit packages. And so they want to study this program, they want to learn about it, they want to understand how this works and how it would intersect with their broader benefit packages. They're not going to make that decision in 6 months. They're going to make it over the span of a couple of years. And so having this program continue to exist will give them that runway to learn about it. And there are well more than 100 children that are benefiting from that program right now. And I can't imagine wanting to strip that support away from those children and those families and those employers that are utilizing it.
And Mr. Chairman, just to wrap that up, I think a comment was made in here last week how we end up being at the bottom of a lot of things in Kentucky. Kentucky's ranked number 48 and all these terrible things. But here in Kentucky, we're ranked really high on the things that we're doing for childcare. And I'm proud to be part of that movement to make change for childcare in Kentucky and to be innovative. Because how many times in government can we actually be innovative and make changes in the real lives of people?
Thank you.
May I follow up, please?
Yes.
You'll remember I signed on to House Bill 499, right? And I was interested in seeing what it would do. It, of course, addresses the affordability crisis in childcare. And I'm all for what is essentially a coupon for middle-income families, which is what House Bill 499 is serving as right now. It does not, I believe, create any new slots, add capacity to childcare providers, and it does not, I don't believe, get any new kids in care, because I think what it's doing is helping families who are already working, who already had their kids in care. So I just think, let's be clear, right? And when you say it wasn't meant to solve childcare, I understand that. Let's take a lot of bites of the apple, but let's also produce something that is meant to solve our childcare crisis in Kentucky. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the representative and Charles going through a very good explanation of your approach and what we're trying to look at and focus on. And and I'm glad to hear that we're starting other states are starting to look at what we're trying to do and so forth. So between you, Charles, and Ms. Shanks and Ms. Wallace, I appreciate y'all's leadership and getting involved, particularly in the 499 and so forth. Charles, I want to ask you a question a little more in detail in terms of looking at the zones for child cares and so forth. Could you give us a rough idea on what the current offerings are in the corporation of offering a child care center, i.e., let's take ABC company in a downtown of some city in the Commonwealth. How many of those exist that offer some type of child assistance or child care room or facility to help support that? And then could you expand on what additional interest? And I understand there is a hesitation from business because you're right. This is not a quick gratification, instantaneous result. This is a long, methodical process we have to go through in order to get that culture adopted to this mindset to support childcare. So could you give us a little explanation, a little more, a better understanding of what the potential is and how much interest you're getting, even though people are somewhat shy?
So I think employer-assisted childcare comes in a whole bunch of different forms. I think the most common way that you see it is actually through dependent care flexible spending accounts, which function very similar to a health flexible spending account. And so we are seeing an increased availability of those, and those can be really helpful for a lot of families when it comes to the affordability side of things. There's programs like the Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership, where it's more of a direct engagement and helping with affordability. You also see arrangements where maybe employer is working with a local childcare resource and referral agency to secure slots or to help their employees find childcare. And then I think more of your Cadillac type proposal, so to speak, is when you see actual on-site facilities. And we're hearing more and more about those, and we're getting more and more questions from employers about, hey, how can I do this? What's a good starting point? And there's several well-known examples in this state of employers that provide actual on-site facilities. Toyota, Baptist Health, you can look at Rockcastle Regional, Yum Brands. You see a lot of those different types. And I think one of the most interesting things we've seen recently is Clark County Public Schools. Clark County Public Schools recently opened a facility called the Eagle's Nest. And that is a facility specifically for school district staff. So teachers, other members of that staff can actually bring their kids there to that childcare facility while they're working, while they're teaching other kids. And I think that's a really exciting proposal. Some of the things that employers run into is it's intimidating to get into that space. If you are a manufacturer, you're building car parts, if you are a chemical manufacturer, whatever it might be, you know how to do that really well. You're really good at logistics, acquiring your raw materials and bringing those to market. Now you also want to open up a childcare facility. It's a completely different world for them. And so a lot of them are approaching that very methodically, very slowly. And there's also big conversations that are having with company leaderships about the fact that, hey, when we open this, it will probably lose revenue. It probably will, but we will make up for that when it comes to employee retention and recruitment. So there's difficult math that has to be talked through. I do want to connect that, though, to this bill, because one of the things that this bill does suggest is that when local governments are looking at local land use rules, they should speak to some guidance around opening up childcare facilities in places like industrial districts, in commercial districts. What are the rules for that? What can you and what can you not do? I mentioned a chemical manufacturer, for example. We probably might not want to have on-site childcare at a chemical manufacturing plant. But there's other types, but maybe we can dictate, how far away does that need to be? What are some of the special standards that might need to be in place? There's things like that this bill, I think, can help provide a ton of guidance to. And I will say in some conversations with employers, when it comes to starting on-site childcare, is zoning comes up. And that's something they have to look at very closely to determine, okay, we would love to have an on-site facility, but can we even do that in the first place? And what are the rules? How do we navigate this? And when you run into rules, it can create a lot of reasons to say no. It can create a lot of reasons not to do something if it becomes excessively complicated. And one of the great things about this bill the sponsors put forward is that the goal is to simplify that and to streamline that and to provide some regulatory relief.
Yeah, I'll follow up, Mr. Chairman, and I'll finish my questions. That was my next question, Charles, in terms of the challenge from a zoning coding point of view, because each county would have their own definition and zoning and so forth, and there might not be one cookie cutter approach to this. It's only have to be customized. And I don't know if have you talked to, and I'm on local government, and so that's why I'm sort of asking these questions. What can we anticipate or see as a result of this bill passing over the interim and maybe even next session in terms of trying to help facilitate or address some of those zoning challenges from the cities and counties?
So that's going to be totally up to them, Representative Fleming. I appreciate the question, and I'll let Charles add anything that I've missed. But we do want to make sure that they have autonomy in being able to make the best decisions for themselves. So us working and saying, hey, let's set up a framework for you all to be able to do this and become a child care ready community or a child care designated community. But we really, I don't see a lot of legislation coming from the state because we want it all to be at the local level, making the best decisions. Louisville did this a few years ago, and this is kind of where we got the idea from as we were talking through it. And it really allowed more growth with child care centers in Louisville. And so we're hoping, a lot of times we don't look as Louisville as a place that we want to, as rural Kentucky wants to build off of. But you all really did lead the way on that. And being able, if you all could do that in Jefferson County, why can't we do that in rural Kentucky too?
If I could add on that point, Louisville pursued their reform starting in 2021. That was a huge conversation that took place that brought together a lot of stakeholders. And this models that process in a lot of ways where stakeholder engagement is built in to this in numerous places. But I do want to point out one of the great results of what Jefferson County did with their zoning reforms is they, prior to those reforms, they had no licensed type 2 childcare providers. These are going to be in-home providers that generally serve up to about 12 kids. Those just simply didn't exist. They couldn't really exist in a residential area. Since those reforms, Louisville now has a couple of those. One of those offers 24-hour, 7 days a week care, which I can tell you is very difficult to find. And probably one of the number one things I hear about from employers when it comes to childcare is how much they need 24-hour care for those non-traditional shifts. Well, as a result of those zoning reforms that Louisville pursued, they have that now. They have that. And I think that's a really important way to illustrate the impact that this can have. A couple of things the bill does is that it does require the Cabinet for Economic Development to put together some recommendations and best practices and list out all the different things they need to address. That will need to be made available and presented to this committee before the start of the next legislative session. So you all will actually have an opportunity to do that. Similarly, applications for this wouldn't take place until next year. So local governments would have a lot of runway if this is something they're interested in doing. They'll have plenty of time to learn. But the other part of it is that the bill requires stakeholder engagement. They have to have this big stakeholder engagement, bringing together planning and design professionals along with child care advocates and all those different entities that have a say in this process. It kind of brings everybody to the table.
And I just one follow up to that. I'm going to say I don't think you'll see anything in local government. We have asked for during the interim for the cabinet to show us what they've come up with, so we could have changes if we need to be more specific of what we want to see. But there won't be any policy driven big changes.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the conversation on this. Sponsor and I have had talked about child care and some different things. We have different views in this body about how the role that government plays on this issue. And I would just caution us, I think it's great that we provide a framework, that we make sure that we remove barriers and hurdles to that opportunity for people to have proper child care, but that government doesn't push into those, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says that we should be involved in a number of things that we try to push into. So I just hope that we really look at that and we don't try to overstep our bounds on that as we move forward. Thank you.
Representative Kleins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really have a statement, that I think most people are very proud of their community. And I think House Bill 561 takes a very communal approach to helping families and businesses in child care. So that's why I was a primary co-sponsor.
Thank you. At this time, we got one more. Representative Raymond again.
One quick note, if I may. I wanted to thank you all for shouting out Louisville's work on this. It was actually Senator Cassie Chambers Armstrong who was the lead sponsor of this bill, who's really a preeminent expert because she spent months doing this stakeholder engagement. I think she's going to be such a fantastic resource on this bill as it moves to the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, if we could have a motion on House Bill 561 as amended by the sub. Got a motion by Representative Fleming. A second by Representative Wilson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's right, motion. We have to do a roll call. I'm sorry. So, Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Baker.
Yes.
Representative Kleins.
Yes.
Representative Decker.
Pass.
Representative Dietz.
Yes.
Representative Elliott. Representative Fleming.
Aye.
Representative Gooch. Representative Proctor.
No.
Representative Rayburn. Representative Raymond.
Yes.
Representative Riley.
Yes.
Representative Rourks.
Yes.
Representative Wilner.
Yes.
Representative Wilson.
Yes.
Chair Hebron.
Yes.
The bill passes with favorable expression. 12 yes votes, 2 no votes, and 1 pass. Thank you. And at this time, Representative Hebron will continue to stay at the desk and present her next bill. So proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Samara Heverin, 18th District State Representative. So House Concurrent Resolution 43 reestablishes the Early Childhood Education Task Force. Last year or 2 years ago, we had really great conversations during the interim about what we need to do. The biggest thing that we found, childcare has been, our email boxes have been blowing up. We've had a lot of conversation about this across both chambers and among both parties and how we do that. The number one thing I found as being chairwoman of Families and Children is there's still not a total consensus of what we need to do to move childcare forward in Kentucky. And so we've got to start addressing the long-term systematic issues that the childcare industry faces in Kentucky. And so this would allow us to continue to have those conversations in one specific committee rather than just Families and Children, and being able to bring all the stakeholders together again and saying, we've really got to figure this out. Now, despite what we're going to do during the 2024 session on childcare, I think it's still important that we really continue this conversation, like I said, to fix the long-term systematic issues that we do see the child care industry facing in our Commonwealth. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Raymond.
I loved being on the Early Childhood Education Task Force a couple of years ago, right? And we served together. I feel like we already did this, right? And Senator Danny Carroll, who was your co-chair of that committee, he said the other day, we already did this. And I feel that there was consensus. I feel that there was a strong consensus amongst early childhood education providers, amongst practitioners who are on the ground, literally on the ground with our 2 and 3-year-olds. And they said, what we need is hundreds of millions of dollars in state investment. So my question is, what makes you think we're going to get a different answer from those folks and that we can get it in 6 months?
Thank you, Representative Raymond, for your question. I think I've had a lot of conversations of groups coming. I don't know of the groups that have been coming to you with budgetary asks, but as they come, they're all very different. And so we have had some consensus among child care stakeholders, but there's still not been the appropriate amount. And I tell you, when I look at my caucus, there's not a big interest in doing stabilization payments and continuing the ARPA funding that came from federal government. And so if that's not consensus among the entire General Assembly, then that's another question, the ones that are taking the votes and trying to figure out what to do. And so as we look at that, I think we've got to be able to build consensus among the Kentucky General Assembly and the stakeholders, because every time I've had someone come into my office, it's been a different amount. It's been a different thought. Everyone is different. And while I do respect the groups that have come together and provided a coalition supporting a specific ask, I think it doesn't fix the long term. Throwing money at an already broken system does not fix the systematic issues that the childcare industry is facing. I was reading a great article yesterday, and it was talking about this is happening all over. It's not just Kentucky, it's across all of our states. And so until we can fix those long-term issues, and I don't know that they're government related, but until we can have a conversation that just doesn't throw money at a problem, I don't know that it's going to change. Any follow-up? Thank you.
If there are no more questions, could we have a motion on House Concurrent Resolution 43? Got a motion by Representative Gooch, second. Representative Kleins, seconds. Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Baker. Representative Kleins. Representative Decker.
Yes.
Representative Dietz.
Yes.
Representative Elliott. Representative Fleming.
A quick explanation of my eye. I think it's very important, coming from a business point of view, that once you launch a product or a service or a concept, you need to monitor and oversee it and making sure that things are collaborated and cooperated, and making sure you're accomplishing your goals and objectives, and things can become fluid. And so I think it's a good idea and a good approach to make sure we have some type of understanding and getting input as things evolve when it comes to early childhood education. I think it's very important. I appreciate it, and it's an aye.
Representative Gooch. Aye. Representative Proctor.
Yes.
Representative Rayburn. No. Representative Raymond.
Yes, may I explain my vote?
Yes, you may.
I don't imagine, since I'm not returning to the General Assembly, that I'll get to be a part of this second go-round. But I would like to say that Representative Lindsey Burke from my caucus would be an invaluable asset to this committee. And I think it's really important that we have a legislator who's a mother with a child in childcare, and there's very, very few of those. That's part of our problem. Thank you.
Representative Riley.
Yes.
Representative Rourks.
Yes.
Representative Wilner.
Yes.
Representative Wilson.
Yes.
Chair Hebron.
Yes, thank you.
The bill passes with favorable expression by 14 yes votes and 1 no vote.
Can I make a follow-up
Yes,
comment,
you may.
Representative Riley? Representative Raymond, I appreciate your comment. I think insinuating because I don't have children, I think it's really important that we have really different life experiences here in the Commonwealth, and that's what makes each of us as legislators very special. And so I've not been blessed with children yet. It doesn't mean that I'm not focused on how to make Kentucky the best place it can be, because when I look at my role as family and children's chairwoman, I look at it as a way for me to be a parent to all the kids in Kentucky, because that's why I'm here, to serve people. And so whether I have birth children or not doesn't make me any less valuable on the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Heverin, certainly didn't mean to impugn you. This legislature is older than most of our districts, and the largest constituent group that we represent is women with children. It's an
At this
important
time, we will
perspective.
adjourn. Thank you very much.